The American judge, a man whose face had been an impenetrable mask of stern authority for days, looked directly at me, and his hands, resting on the polished wood of his bench, were trembling. In that surreal, silent moment that stretched into an eternity, I knew he wasn't just seeing a young woman fighting for her dignity against the corporate machine that tried to chew her up and spit her out. He was seeing a past he had meticulously buried, a ghost he thought he had successfully escaped decades ago. And the entire, unbelievable chain of events that led us to this precipice of revelation had all started with a joke. It was a casual, cruel joke, engineered with smiling malice and designed not just to hurt me, but to fundamentally break me. My name is Anna Hayes. For as long as I can remember, for the entirety of my life, I have clung to a single guiding belief: that if I just worked hard enough, if I kept my head down, my voice quiet, and caused no trouble for anyone, I could meticulously construct a world for myself. A fortress of achievement where the messy, unknown circumstances of my birth would be rendered utterly irrelevant. I believed that success was a universal solvent, capable of dissolving prejudice, and that competence was an impenetrable shield. I was profoundly, devastatingly wrong. The life I had so carefully, so painstakingly built for myself at Sterling Price, one of Chicago's most prestigious and cutthroat financial firms, the very symbol of my success, was about to be shattered. It would be brought down not by a professional failure or a market crash, but by a single casual act of cruelty, a string of words wrapped in laughter. That moment sent me on a journey I never intended to take, a path that would unravel my carefully controlled world and lead me straight into this very courtroom, standing before this trembling judge. It would force me to confront the one, singular truth I had spent my entire existence, every ounce of my energy, trying to outrun and forget. Sterling Price was the kind of place you only see in movies, a cathedral of modern capitalism. It was all gleaming glass and cold, hard steel, soaring dizzyingly over the Chicago River, a monument to money, power, and relentless ambition. The air inside hummed with a specific kind of energy, a mixture of high-stakes pressure and intoxicating privilege. To be hired there, to walk those halls as a junior financial analyst, felt less like getting a job and more like winning a cosmic lottery. For me, a girl who started with nothing, it was so much more than a paycheck or a line on a resume. It was validation in its purest form. It was tangible, undeniable proof that I, Anna Hayes, a girl with no known history, no ancestral tree to point to, could still seize the pen and write her own future. My adoptive parents, John and Mary Hayes, are the very definition of kindness, the kind of selfless, loving people you read about in books and hope are real. They gave me a life I could never have dreamed of, one filled with unwavering love and comforting stability in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. It was a universe away from the sterile, transient world of the foster care system where I'd spent the first few bewildering months of my life. They are my real family, my only family in every meaningful sense of that word. But even in a home overflowing with love, the unspoken questions linger like ghosts in the periphery. Growing up, I was always acutely, sometimes painfully, aware of the differences. I was the only black child in our entire neighborhood, the only one in almost all of my classes at school, and my skin tone stood in stark contrast in every single one of our family portraits. My parents, in their boundless love, always told me I was special, that I was chosen. It was a beautiful, comforting thought, a narrative of love and selection, but it also served to underline a basic, inescapable truth. I didn't quite belong in the way others did. It wasn't a constant, sharp pain, but more like a low, persistent hum in the background of my life, a quiet, ever-present reminder that entire chapters of my own story were missing, the pages ripped out before I ever had a chance to read them. As I grew into an adult, I learned to compartmentalize, to push those unsettling feelings down into a deep, locked part of my mind. I focused with ferocious intensity on what I could control: my education, my performance, my career. I graduated at the very top of my university class and poured every fiber of my being, every waking hour, into landing that coveted job at Sterling Price. I truly and naively believed that professional success would be the great equalizer. I reasoned that in the sterile, data-driven world of high finance, a world of spreadsheets and bottom lines, the only color that should matter was green. I thought my competence would be my shield, my flawless work my armor. For the first year it seemed my theory was correct. At work, I was praised, albeit in a detached corporate way, for my meticulous, error-free work. I kept to myself, always polite, always professional, and I tried with an exhausting amount of effort to fit in. I became a student of their culture, learning to laugh at the right moments during stories about family sailing trips, and to nod along during endless chats about ski lodges in Aspen and inherited summer homes in the Hamptons. Most importantly, I learned to ignore the little pinprick comments, the tiny cuts that reminded me every day that I was different. It was the textbook definition of microaggressions, the kind of subtle but corrosive remarks that black women in corporate America know all too well and are expected to absorb with a smile. A surprised, "Wow, you're so articulate," after I delivered a presentation I had spent 100 hours perfecting. Being asked, with no sense of irony, to be the face of diversity for a new company brochure, as if my presence alone was a marketing tool. Each instance was a small cut, a tiny tear in my armor, a reminder that my presence in these hallowed halls was seen as an anomaly, an exception, not the rule. My main antagonists, the architects of my eventual undoing, were a duo named Mark and Sarah. Mark was a senior analyst, the kind of effortlessly charming handsome guy who was born into immense wealth and wore his privilege like a custom-made suit. He moved through the world with an unshakable confidence that comes from never having been told no. He was the office golden boy, his path to the top preordained. Sarah was his shadow, a reflection of his ambition. A junior analyst like me, she had quickly calculated that aligning herself with Mark was the fastest, most efficient route up the corporate ladder. She mimicked his speech, his opinions, his smirks. Their campaign against me started small, with plausible deniability, forgetting to add me to crucial email chains about project updates. Accidentally, leaving my name off meeting invites for brainstorming sessions I should have led. At first I tried to rationalize it, to ignore the pattern. I told myself it was just office politics, the kind of jockeying for position that happens everywhere. My response was simply to work harder, stay later, and make absolutely certain that my reports were so flawless, so indispensable, that I couldn't be ignored. I thought my performance would be my ultimate armor, a fortress they could not breach. But their behavior was never really about my work. It was about my very presence. They seemed morbidly fascinated by me, but in the way a cruel child might be fascinated by a strange insect they've trapped in a jar. The questions about my background started with a feigned, subtle curiosity. "Hayes is an interesting last name for you, Anna. Any relation to Isaac Hayes?" Mark would ask with a predatory smirk during a coffee break, loud enough for others to hear. "No, Mark," I'd reply, my voice flat and cold, giving him nothing. "Just a common name." He was pushing, methodically testing my boundaries, searching for a weakness. And every time I refused to give him a reaction, he got bolder, more aggressive. The questions became more pointed, more personal, and always, strategically, in front of a group. "So, Anna, you never talk about your family. Are they from around here?" Sarah would ask, her eyes wide with a practiced, fake innocence. I'd give them the same polished, clean version I gave everyone. I was adopted. My parents live in the suburbs. That single piece of information was like blood in the water for sharks. My adoption, the very core of my most private and personal story, became their new favorite obsession. It was the one part of me I couldn't quantify or explain with a spreadsheet. It was the missing piece of my puzzle they knew, instinctively, they could exploit. A constant, low-grade anxiety became my new normal. The office that had once been my symbol of ultimate success now felt like a hostile minefield. Every hallway, every meeting, every coffee break was fraught with potential danger. The stress was a physical weight crushing me. I started double and triple checking my work obsessively, terrified of making even a tiny, insignificant mistake they could seize upon and use against me. I felt like I had to be perfect, not just for the sake of my career, but as if I were single-handedly representing my entire race in this glass tower. It was an impossible, exhausting burden. The breaking point, the moment the 1,000 small cuts became a single, gaping wound, came at a team lunch. The entire department was there, packed into a noisy, expensive downtown restaurant, including our managing director, Mr. Thompson. Mark was holding court as he always did, regaling the table with a story about his family's ancestral castle in Scotland. Everyone was captivated, hanging on his every word. Then, abruptly, he turned his attention to me. The entire table went quiet. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. "You know, Anna," he began, a wide, predatory grin spreading slowly across his face. "We're all talking about our family trees, our heritage. Got me thinking. You're kind of like a premium product, aren't you?" I just stared at him, my fork frozen in midair. My blood ran cold. I could feel every single eye at that long table fixed on me, a mixture of curiosity and morbid excitement. "What do you mean, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair with performative casualness. "The rest of us, we're stuck with the family we were born into. Crazy uncles, embarrassing cousins, all the baggage, the whole deal. But you were chosen. Handpicked. It's like getting a bespoke suit tailored just for you, or buying a limited edition car. No messy history to worry about. Sterling Price must have loved that. A clean slate." A few people chuckled nervously, glancing at each other and at Mr. Thompson for a cue on how to react. Sarah, of course, jumped in to support him, her voice high and shrill. "He's right. It's the ultimate brand advantage." Anna Hayes, a curated employee. "No baggage. It's brilliant." The table erupted in laughter. Not just nervous chuckles now, but loud, unrestrained, braying mockery. And worst of all, I saw Mr. Thompson, my boss, the man I looked to for leadership, crack a smile and then deliberately look away, giving them his silent, damning permission. But Mark wasn't done. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still deliberately loud enough for everyone at the table to hear clearly. "The only question is, was it a domestic model or an import? You know, sometimes the foreign ones have quality control issues. And that was it. The final, devastating blow. The casual, layered racism, the dehumanizing comparison of a human being to a car, the public humiliation in front of my peers and superiors. It all crashed down on me at once. The sound of their laughter morphed into a roaring in my ears, deafening and distorted. The faces of my colleagues blurred into a grotesque gallery of grinning, contorted masks. They weren't just joking about my adoption anymore. They were mocking my blackness, my otherness, my very being, and they were enjoying it. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly and violently against the floor. I couldn't form a single word. The air had been knocked out of my lungs. I grabbed my purse from the back of my chair, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get a grip on it, and I walked out of that restaurant. I didn't run. I walked with what little dignity I had left. I didn't look back. As the cold, biting Chicago air hit my face, the tears I had been desperately choking back finally broke free, streaming down my cheeks. The world I had so carefully, so meticulously built for myself hadn't just cracked. It had been utterly and completely shattered. The days that followed were a disorienting, painful blur. Walking into the office felt like stepping onto a stage where I'd been publicly stripped bare and humiliated. The worst part was the silence. No one ever mentioned it. Not Mark, not Sarah, not a single one of the people who had laughed. They all acted like absolutely nothing had happened. Their suffocating silence was just as loud, just as violent as their laughter had been. It was a clear, unambiguous message. You don't matter. Your pain doesn't matter. It was a sophisticated form of psychological warfare, designed to make me question my own sanity, to make me believe I had imagined it all. Was I just overreacting? Was it, in their twisted world, just a joke? But I knew what I felt. The humiliation was a physical sickness, a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach that wouldn't go away. Gathering what little courage I had left, I decided to go to human resources. A part of me, the naive, hopeful part, actually believed the system that was supposedly designed to protect employees would protect me. I sat in the cold, sterile HR office and recounted the entire story to the manager, a woman named Brenda. I told her everything, my voice trembling. She listened with a practiced, neutral expression, her face a carefully constructed mask of corporate concern. When I finished, my story hanging in the air between us, she let out a long, weary sigh. "Anna," she said, her tone dripping with a condescending pity that was more insulting than outright anger, "we have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment here at Sterling Price. You know that. However, we also have to be realistic. Finance is a high-pressure, high-stakes world. People need to blow off steam. Sometimes jokes are made that are a bit off-color. And to be frank, Mark and Sarah are two of our top-performing assets. Are you absolutely sure you aren't being just a little sensitive?" Sensitive. The word hit me like a physical slap across the face. In that single word, she was dismissing my pain, invalidating my experience, and reframing it as my own personal failing. She suggested I take a thicker skin approach and offered to mediate a conversation with Mark and Sarah to clear the air. The message was loud and crystal clear. They weren't the problem, my reaction was. Management was going to protect its stars, and I was disposable. Leaving her office, I felt a profound sense of hopelessness that was deeper than anything I had ever known. The institution I dedicated my entire life to had not only failed to protect me, it had actively turned its back on me. That night, sleep was impossible. The echoing sound of laughter from the restaurant played on a loop in my mind, intermingled with Brenda's dismissive, patronizing voice. The joke had done more than just humiliate me. It had unearthed all the buried insecurities and fears about my adoption that I had suppressed for decades. For the first time in my life, I didn't just feel like a person who happened to be adopted. I felt like an adoptee, a separate category of person, defined entirely by a past I didn't know. The feeling of not belonging, once a low, manageable hum, was now a deafening, all-consuming roar. Who was I, really? Hayes was the name of the wonderful family who loved me and raised me, but what was my name before that? Where did I get my eyes, the color of my skin, my DNA? I'd always consciously avoided digging into that part of my life. I was terrified of what I might find, or even worse, what I wouldn't find. A complete void. Most of all, I was afraid of hurting my parents, of making them feel for even a second like they weren't enough for me. But now, in the wake of the assault on my identity, the emptiness felt unbearable, a vacuum that threatened to swallow me whole. Driven by a desperate need for something, anything tangible, I went to my closet and pulled out a small, worn wooden box, my single solitary connection to my past. Inside, nestled in the dark velvet lining, was a small, faded pink blanket, worn soft with time, and a single folded piece of official-looking paper. I had looked at that paper 1,000 times over the years. It was a standard hospital form. Mother's name, Jane Doe. Father's name, blank. But at the bottom, there was a handwritten note from a nurse, the ink slightly faded. Her mother loved her very much. She prayed you would find her. God bless this child. There was one other detail, a tiny piece of information I had always overlooked, perhaps because I didn't know what to do with it. The name of the nurse who signed the note. Emily. Staring at that name, Emily, a new feeling began to cut through the suffocating fog of pain and shame. Anger. Cold, clear, clarifying anger. Mark and Sarah hadn't just told a bad joke. They had desecrated something sacred. They had taken my private, complex story of profound loss and profound love, and twisted it into a weapon to be used against me for their own amusement. The next morning, I did something I never in my life thought I would do. I sat at my laptop and Googled employment discrimination lawyers in Chicago. I scrolled through pages of slick corporate law firms until one caught my eye. It was a small, all-female firm with a simple, direct website. One lawyer's profile in particular stood out. Her name was Imani Thompson. She was a black woman, and her bio spoke not just of legal victories, but of a passion for fighting for the dignity of people marginalized and silenced in corporate America. I called and scheduled a consultation for the next day. Her office was the complete antithesis of Sterling Price. It was warm, welcoming, filled with books and plants, a sanctuary. Ms. Thompson herself was poised, sharp, and intelligent, with kind eyes that seemed to see everything, to see right through the corporate armor I still wore. I told her my entire story. I told her about the constant microaggressions, the devastating lunch, the infuriating HR meeting. I even found myself telling her about the small wooden box, the pink blanket, and the nurse's note. When I finally finished, my voice raw, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me, not as a potential client or a case file, but as a person. "Anna," she said. Her voice filled with a quiet, controlled fire that gave me strength. "They didn't just harass you. They tried to erase you. They tried to reduce your entire existence, your entire story, to a punchline because your strength and your presence made them feel insecure. This isn't just about a bad joke. This is about your fundamental right to exist and to be treated with dignity." For the first time since that horrible day, I felt seen. Truly seen. The mountain of shame I had been carrying on my shoulders started to feel just a little bit lighter. "What do we do?" I whispered, the words barely audible. A small, determined smile touched her lips. "We fight," she said. "We file a lawsuit against Sterling Price for fostering a hostile work environment, and against Mark and Sarah individually for their targeted harassment. Their entire defense will be that it was just a joke. Our job is to show the court the profound, lasting damage of their actions. We will make them see you." That day everything changed. It was no longer just about surviving or getting away. It was about reclaiming my story. The fight wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about my identity, my dignity, and the quiet, accommodating girl who was finally ready to find her voice. The legal process was a brutal war of attrition. Sterling Price's massive, high-powered law firm threw everything they had at us, filing motion after motion to try to get the case dismissed as frivolous and without merit. Their lawyers subjected me to depositions that lasted for hours, twisting my words, taking my life apart piece by piece, trying to paint me as an unstable, overly emotional woman just looking for a payday. They relentlessly referred to Mark and Sarah's calculated abuse as harmless workplace banter, and argued that my status as an adoptee had no special legal protection. Their strategy was clear: to wear me down, to exhaust my resources and my spirit, to make the fight so painful that I would simply give up. But Imani was my rock. She was relentless, a brilliant tactician who met their every move with a counter-move. She built our case brick by brick, with painstaking care. "They want you to feel small and insignificant," she'd tell me during our late-night strategy sessions. "That's their only real weapon. Don't let them. Your story is your power." After months of grueling preparation, our day in court finally arrived. Walking up the imposing stone steps of the federal courthouse, my heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break free. Mark and Sarah were already there with their legal team, looking smug and unconcerned. As I walked past, they shot me a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. Our judge was Arthur Harrington. He was in his late 60s, with a formidable reputation for being tough, intellectual, and scrupulously fair. He sat elevated above us, his face a stern, unreadable poker face that gave absolutely nothing away. The defense lawyer, a slick, condescending man named Peterson, began by arguing for a summary dismissal. He droned on about how Sterling Price had comprehensive anti-harassment policies and that my failure to fit in with the company culture was a personal problem, not a corporate one. He kept repeating the phrase, "harmless joke," like a mantra. "Your Honor," he argued with theatrical exasperation, "if we start policing every joke in the workplace, the entire system will grind to a halt." Judge Harrington listened intently, his face completely unreadable, and then, with a simple bang of his gavel, denied the motion. The trial would proceed. When it was my turn to testify, I thought my heart would beat out of my chest. My hands were slick with sweat. Imani had prepared me for this moment for months. "Just tell your truth, Anna," she'd said calmly just before I walked to the stand. "Look at the judge and tell your truth." I took the stand. Imani began her questioning, her voice gentle and steady, guiding me through my story. When we got to the point where I had to describe the team lunch, the entire courtroom fell silent. I recounted Mark's words, my voice cracking with the memory of the humiliation. "And how did that make you feel, Anna?" Imani asked softly. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "It felt like I was nothing," I said, the words heavy with pain. "It felt like all they could see when they looked at me was a black girl who didn't have a real family. They took my very existence and turned it into a joke. It was the most profound and soul-crushing shame I have ever felt in my life." Then came the cross-examination. Peterson was brutal, circling me like a predator. "Ms. Hayes, isn't it true you were simply jealous of Mr. Peterson and Ms. Collins's success at the firm?" "No, that's not true. You're asking this court for a significant amount of money. Isn't this whole lawsuit just an attempt to get rich quick after you failed to get ahead?" "No," I said, my voice shaking with a rising anger. "This is about my dignity." He then pivoted, turning his attack towards my adoption. "You've testified that you do not know your biological parents, correct?" "That's correct. So you have a documented history of feeling like you don't belong? A pre-existing sensitivity to these issues, perhaps?" "Objection." Imani's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "Counsel is attempting to pathologize the universal experience of adoptees and use it against the plaintiff." "Sustained," Judge Harrington rumbled from the bench. "Move on, Mr. Peterson." Peterson then brought up the nurse's note from my wooden box, which had been entered into evidence. "This note from this Emily. You've put a lot of stock in this, haven't you? A sentimental note from a complete stranger." "It's all I have of my history," I whispered. "Exactly," Peterson said, turning dramatically to the judge with a triumphant sneer. "It's all she has. Fantasy. This entire case is built on feelings, not facts. On hypersensitivity, not harassment." He sat down, looking immensely pleased with himself. I felt gutted, as if he had scored a direct hit. Finally, it was time for closing arguments. Peterson went first, repeating his claims that I was just an oversensitive employee who couldn't take a joke and was trying to exploit the system. Then Imani stood up. She walked slowly and deliberately towards the judge's bench, commanding the attention of the entire room. "Your Honor," she began, her voice resonating with deep, unwavering conviction. "The defense wants you to believe this case is about a single joke. They want you to dismiss Anna Hayes's profound pain as mere hypersensitivity. But we are here today because words have power. And those words, delivered with malice and wrapped in laughter, were not a joke. They were a tool. A weapon used to remind a young, brilliant black woman that no matter how hard she worked or how much she achieved, some people would always see her as less than, as other." She paused, letting the words hang in the silent air. "They weaponized her identity against her. And when she bravely asked for help, the very company that was supposed to protect her told her that she was the problem." Imani then picked up the clear evidence bag containing the faded pink blanket and the nurse's note. "The defense called this a fantasy," she said, holding it up for the judge to see. "This note, this blanket. To them, it's meaningless clutter. But to my client, it is her entire history. It is a testament to a mother's love and the only link she has to a past that was stolen from her. And it was this sacred, fragile history that the defendants decided to mock and defile in front of a room full of their colleagues for a cheap laugh." As Imani spoke, I chanced a glance at Judge Harrington. And that's when I saw it. His face, which had been an impenetrable stone mask for the entire trial, had completely crumbled. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles bulged. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the bench. And his hands were visibly, uncontrollably trembling. He was staring, transfixed, at the evidence bag in Imani's hand. His gaze was locked on the small, folded nurse's note. His breathing was shallow, his eyes wide with a look of dawning, gut-wrenching horror. "Your Honor?" Peterson asked, his voice laced with confusion at the judge's strange reaction. Judge Harrington didn't respond. He seemed lost in a memory a million miles away. He slowly, painfully, raised his eyes from the evidence and looked directly at me. In his eyes, I no longer saw a judge looking at a plaintiff, but a man looking at a ghost. Then, in a move that stunned the entire courtroom into absolute breathless silence, he spoke. His voice was not the booming, authoritative tone of a federal judge, but a raw, broken whisper. "The blanket," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't comprehend. Was it pink? A pale pink, with small, embroidered yellow ducks in the corner. A collective gasp swept through the room. I could only nod, my mind racing, trying to process the impossible question. How could he know that? "And the nurse," he continued, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "The nurse who signed the note. The one named Emily. Was she at St. Mary's Hospital? Did she have kind eyes and fiery red hair?" I nodded again, completely speechless, a wave of dizziness washing over me. How could he possibly know that? Judge Harrington closed his eyes for a long moment, and a single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. He opened them and looked directly at me, all pretense of judicial impartiality gone, replaced by the raw, shocking vulnerability of a man completely laid bare. 30 years ago, he said, his voice cracking with the weight of 3 decades of grief, a young man and a young woman made an impossible, heartbreaking choice. They were just kids with no money and no family support. The young woman was a brave nursing student at St. Mary's. Her name was Catherine. Her best friend, a kind-hearted nurse with gentle eyes and red hair named Emily, helped them give their baby girl up for adoption, praying with all their hearts that she would have a better life than they could provide. He paused, his entire body shaking with the force of his confession. The courtroom was in a state of absolute paralyzed shock. "That young man was me," Judge Arthur Harrington confessed to the silent, stunned room. "And that baby girl was my daughter." The courtroom exploded into chaos. The bailiff shouted for order, but it was a useless gesture against the tidal wave of shock. Peterson was on his feet, objecting frantically, his voice completely lost in the pandemonium. Imani stood frozen, her mouth agape. And I just sat there, my world spinning off its axis, unable to process the cataclysmic revelation. The judge, the impartial arbiter of my case for justice, was my biological father. He called for an immediate recess and was, of course, recused from the case. The story was everywhere within hours. Facing a public relations nightmare of epic proportions, Sterling Price settled out of court for a significant sum. Mark and Sarah were unceremoniously fired. Justice, in a way I never could have possibly predicted, had been served. But none of that mattered as much as what came next. My father Arthur and I met a week later. There were no lawyers, no cameras, no judges. Just 2 strangers, a father and a daughter, trying to bridge a 30-year gap of silence and pain in a quiet coffee shop. He told me about my mother, Catherine, how they had loved each other desperately as scared kids but knew they couldn't give me the life I deserved. He told me he had searched for me for years, but the sealed adoption records made it an impossible task. He had buried his grief and regret in his work, climbing the ladder of the legal world while a part of him remained frozen in time. Meeting him didn't magically fix everything. It didn't erase the years of feeling like a piece of me was missing, or the sting of the prejudice I had faced. But it was a start. It was the beginning of an entirely new journey to understand not just my past, but my whole self. I began to see that my identity wasn't an empty space defined by what was lost, but a rich, complex tapestry woven from 2 different, equally beautiful worlds. The family that gave me life and the family that gave me a home. I spoke to John and Mary, my parents, and their love only deepened, their arms open to this new, incredible chapter. The cruel, malicious joke that was meant to shame me and put me in my place had, in the most unbelievable twist of fate, set me on the path to becoming whole. It forced me to ask the questions I was always too scared to ask and led me to an answer I never, in my wildest dreams, could have imagined. I left the world of finance behind. That cold, glass tower taught me a valuable lesson. My worth isn't tied to a job title or a salary. I'm in law school now. My new purpose is to help others who have been silenced, to be a voice for those who've been told they don't matter. And with the love and support of both my families, I'm finally learning to use my own voice, not just to tell my story but to fight for others. My healing is a work in progress. It is a long and winding road. But now, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see a stranger or a curated employee. I see Anna Hayes, daughter, future lawyer, a woman who found her strength not in spite of her complicated story, but because of it. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below with your thoughts, leave a like if this moved you, and share this story with others who might need to hear it.